Shemai Tracy, it's lovely to have you here and to talk about your poetry and the most recent book.
Thanks for having me, Taz. It's great to be here. It's on this dingy grey day.
It
This
is
is
it is a bit dingy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a proper December day.
Absolutely. So, I'd like to start by asking, how did poetry begin? And if you can remember the very first time you felt the need to write a poem.
Gosh, I mean, I've been writing nearly all my life, really. So I discovered poetry back when I was about 7 or 8. Um, and like, I'm going back to the 80s now. So poetry was on TV in those days. Pam Ayres had a TV show, I think it was on a Saturday night, and I was addicted. I just adored it. Um, and before that, I was a big Ladybird book reader. And I think it's all stemmed from there, really. And so I started. I can remember my first poem very clearly. It was all about blowing a great big record-breaking bubble gum, or bubble with some gum, I should say. Um, and yeah, and that sort of developed, and it never went away. I had like really encouraging teachers, and the poetry wasn't great, but I was really ridiculously proud of it. And I was that kid who would get up in school, when they said, "Is anybody who'd like to come to the front and sing a song?" I'd get up and I'd recite my poems, and so I was doing it, before it was fashionable. But then later in life, it kind of comes and goes, it ebbs and flows, and so even though I never really stopped, I think I didn't take it seriously until my early 20s, and I really started writing them, and I did my MA when I was 24 in creative writing at Cardiff. But again, I became, the more I wrote and read, the more aware I became that I just didn't have any dramatic life experiences to write about. And then, of course, life deals you its cards, and if you're a creative, you're always looking to make that transaction then into like the written experience.
A lot of writers and poets I know, they tend to utilize their immediate environment, maybe family, friends, etc., to, I guess, to um, compensate for the what you call as the dramatic experiences. I wonder if that's may have happened to you, or did you negotiate this lack of experience in other ways?
Well, I think like you've got, your personality is so multifaceted. So at any given time, I was writing very different material. There was a time when all I was writing was kind of comic prose. And that really served that side of my character. And so I was definitely writing about the place where I grew up, which was the Rhondda. And I was writing about the people I knew. And I'm from a really huge family. My dad was one of 11 children. So got a vast number of relations and cousins. And you just know all these tales. It's hard not to write about them if you want to write. So I definitely wrote about them, but I don't think I've written about them in poetry as much. I think I kind of kept that for my prose. Trewerin, 1965. A prayer for the animals soon to float. No more than driftwood, far less than kid skin, equal to the tire kill spread bara menin under the last bus. In the grass, a game of cowboys and Indians, fingers snapping for guns, stalks under chins, shirts rising over an ant's nest. Now, a prayer for the potholes on the bridge. They shall fill first, then the kitchen lean-tos with their fiberglass waves. The last to go will be the road in, a beaching of tar macadam in this town of drownings. Years to come, there will be droughts. Drones will soar over the pickings like doves.
What led to your debut poetry collection, Bathing on the Roof, published by Parthian Books?
So, I guess I became, like, I began writing intensely around about when my son was a toddler. So I'm going back to about 2012. And he was newly diagnosed, well, he was 6 then, and he was newly diagnosed with autism. I just couldn't stop writing about it. I kind of also wanted to keep a record of that time as well. I mean, I was filled with questions, and it's my language, you know, so it's the way that I try and process it all. And one of the things that I'd try to do at that point was to find reading material, first-person writing, from a parent's perspective, and it just wasn't really out there. And I was a poet, and I was looking for poetry, I was looking for prose, I was looking for anything. And I became aware that, you know, it was a good thing to write because there are other people like me who were looking for that shared experience. And of course, everybody's experience is completely different, and nobody can tell you what the future holds. But I became serious about writing it. I knew I wanted to write a collection once I'd begun. So I published that in 2016. I had a Literature Wales bursary to write that, and that was fantastic. I did a little tour at the time, went up to London, up to the Wheatsheaf with 2 Parthian writers, with Christina Thatcher and Rebecca Parfitt. And so that kind of introduced me to the Parthian hold, as it were. And I just love what they're writing and what they're publishing. So, like, they were a natural fit for me, really. They've got a lot of working class type writers on their books as well, which really appeals to me, coming from a working class background. And so, you know, it's just a constant process of writing. And I'm a member of a little workshop group, and we meet once a month, and that gives you something to write for. But I kind of treat it like a job, and I make sure that I write all the time. You know, and then before you know it, you've got enough material somehow. But that material was from, you know, the Bathing on the Roof is a book of 2 halves. And the first half is titled Bathsheba. And Bathsheba is, you know, the origins of Bathsheba go right back to when I was in my very early 20s. I had this strange experience. I had this really vivid dream. And in the dream, I was Bathsheba. And I knew about Bathsheba because I'd studied religious studies for A-level. So I had this very, very vivid dream, and in it I was Bathsheba. I was a woman, a mother, and I was trying to escape. And I came downstairs the next morning, and my mum said, she said, "Oh, I had such a weird dream last night." I said, "Me too." And I said, "What was yours about?" She said, "Well, who's Bathsheba?" And we'd had almost the same dream, and we couldn't get over it. And it was such a kind of, oh my goodness, it was such a moment in my life. And I've been writing about Bathsheba ever since. And I think what I took away from that was, like, the commonalities that we share as women. I didn't have children at the time, and my mum certainly did. But here we were sharing this experience in this dream. And so that captivated me, and I look for those threads through life. And here I am. I'm 51 now, and I'm still writing that. So that's where Bathing on the Roof came from.
You've just mentioned the 2 parts of the collection, Bathsheba and Flood. I'd love to know more about how these sections took shape or how they speak to each other.
Well, It's a strange process, really. I think I was writing for so long about the geography of the female body. And then lockdown happened and I hadn't written a word of flood at that point. And of course we all retreated, didn't we? We had to. Our world shrunk and we kind of immersed ourselves in nature in a way that most of us wouldn't do every day. And so it kind of grew up around a lot of things, really. In the March, there were terrible floods in March 2020. Over in the Rhondda in particular, where I'm from, Treorchy flooded really badly. And Pontypridd flooded seriously. And so, you know, because I've got relatives all over and friends and still there, I really felt strongly drawn to that. And you hear all these terrible stories about people's belongings being destroyed, and it's still happening now, isn't it? We've had terrible floods in Monmouth. I think because at the time we were fearing this kind of great, big, terrifying anomaly that was COVID, it all became tied in together for me. And my daily walks along the River Ogmore run through a field just by our house, and they're flood fields. So they were completely like the sea, and I couldn't get down to the sea for a while. We couldn't go that far. We live really close to the sea, but this was when we were just outside our backyards, and it just all accumulated, and all I can describe it as is Ridley Walker by Russell Hoban. It's one of my favourite books. And Russell Hoban had said about Ridley Walker years ago, he said that he felt that Ridley Walker wrote him. And that's exactly how I felt about Flood. Flood wrote me. I kind of felt that she was just, she filled my dreams, my walks. She was so playful, so terrifying. And she did speak to me of the female embodiment. So it's very easy for her to be born as this diva. And she would never have been male, because I'm writing predominantly about the female condition. And it dawned on me a lot later that she was Mother Nature. And she's kind of Mother Nature with all the garbs of humankind, and all that passion and love for celebrity, and it's playful really, but it's also speaking to us about our downfall, and all the stuff we accumulate. All our aspirations mean nothing, can all be washed away, our lives, our things. So to me, that kind of did work with Bathsheba, because Bathsheba, there's another side to my writing that I kind of touched on earlier, which was like the more kind of comic, that I really wanted to bring out in my first collection. I'm not a serious person really, but we've all got this facet to us, which is all fearful and it's got, deep. We do some serious thinking. We go to sort of places, in our grief and reflection. I wanted to bring up all sides of myself and my capabilities in that book. So Flood wrote me. Flood woke up on the wrong side of her bed, flowed over the bank with displeasure. There was power in her upsurge, the great swell of her being. Birds who waded in, the egrets and cormorants, recalled that once Flood was happy, but now was better. By better they meant ocean. Flood was broad and tidal estuary. She left a salty ring around their beaks and gave them shells. Flood was beautiful, they said. She should stop and feel it. But how could Flood pause when she was all reflection, moon-driven, surging to sea? Flood recalled her first taste of tarmac, compared it to fennel, preferred it to licorice. She drawled, "No need for glass when you have fiberglass, or slate stacks when you have those aching aluminium greys, the skeletons of automobiles." Ever since she'd drunk her first bollard, Flood had regretted concrete, the way it sunk into her pit and stayed there, trolley-bound, for years. Stories began circulating that Flood had been a stream, had thought big and got lucky. She was fast becoming folklore. It was true that she'd tried all the tricks. Consuming lakes, spouting dams. "I am braver than I know," Flood told the starlings, "bigger than is necessary." Beaks rippled in. The sun gave her prisons. Soon she was run through with flowing, even as she was imbibed. "I am always inside other bodies," she confided to the water rats on the underside of her skin.
You've talked about the lighter side to you, and I think there's an element of sardonic wit that sort of flows through some of these poems. But I wanted to ask you about something else, and that's about your language, which possesses an element of musicality, and I guess a very polished framework for a very first collection, which is beautiful. And I wonder how this poetic language came about.
Well, I think it's really hard to answer that, isn't it? Because you just write how you write. I think, like, if I think back to my earliest influences, I was brought up Church of Wales. Dad went to church, from about his 30s. And I went, not every Sunday, but I went a lot of Sundays. And a lot of what I got out of that was the King James Bible that we were reading there. And, the language of the C of E and Church of Wales service is really beautiful. And it's got all that repetition, which doesn't appeal to me so much as an adult. But as a child, of course, repetition is the name of the game, isn't it, in children's writing? And I think at its earliest, it came from there. And I think it's really influenced my writing all my life, in a way. Yeah, those huge themes, and the fact, so thinking a bit later, I really embraced Shakespeare when I was in the comprehensive school. Everyone else hated it. But to me, it was language that I kind of got because I'd been used to this complicated language of the Bible, and I recognised the poetry in all of it. So I was a kid who was obsessed with poetry. My parents really humoured me. I had poetry evenings at home where I just read read poems to them, and read classics to them, at them. And so I guess it comes from there. And that's probably why I'm still writing about Bathsheba. These are biblical characters. And why I'm doing that, I guess it's really hard to analyse what I'm doing, but maybe I'm always trying to recreate that sense of awe at the world. But something that you manage the more you write is to, and the older you get as well, is to understand the sentimentality kills that. So stripping everything back to its barest form is what really touches people. And I think I learnt that when I was writing about Morgan. I think I understood it by then, that actually when you're in a really emotional period in your life, and maybe an experienced writer by then as well, you can't write emotionally about it. You can't write sentimentality into it because you don't want sympathy. What you want is to share something with people, and you don't want them to go, oh, you poor thing, because there's somebody in me saying, don't feel sorry for me. I've got this wonderful child. This is my life. It's the same as anybody writing about their life. You don't want sympathy. You just want to share. And you want someone to say, oh yeah, I do understand that. So yeah, the language is just mine, I guess. But sometimes I write and I look for beauty and I try and put that into my language. And sometimes I'm looking for something much more abrasive to shake people out of it. And sometimes I like a bit of the both so that people sit up, especially when work has been read. You know, one word can wake someone up a little bit.
Tracy, I want to ask you in particular about one poem, which is Women as Negative Space.
Yeah. Now, that poem, I think, is one of the hardest to talk about in a way. It was my most experimental poem, I think, in the collection. I'm a kind of occasional, I call myself an occasional artist. But, you know, I wanted to be an artist years ago, and when I was young, and I never thought for a minute I wouldn't have been. And so the negative space idea is kind of how I look at the world, because I still draw and I still paint, and you know, it's an exercise in art classes that you draw the negative space around things. And that starts you thinking about the negative space around us as individuals. And so when I was writing that poem, I think I started writing it in a pub. And I was looking at women, groups of women, and how they interact compared to men, and the space that men take up. And all built into that is are the things that we handle and use. How much identity is tied to us because of what we're drinking, what kind of person are we? You know, I came of age in the 90s, and it was, you know, ladette culture. It was all about, you know, you were ladette, you were identified by masculine traits. If you went out and you had a night out in the town, you drunk. So I still carry a lot of that with me. And in this poem, I wanted to write about, as well as like the space that we take up, I wanted to write about the introversion in us, so much that we don't show in those spaces. So we present ourselves, don't we? So the person we are on that night out is not the person we are most of the time. Or maybe not the person that we are with another set of friends. And we're a different person with different people in our lives, and that's role play, and the roles that we give ourselves, the roles that we perform. So I guess what I found interesting about this poem is what isn't in there, really. So at the end, the door opens just a whisker, and you never learn who's coming in. But to me, it feels like these are the moments before something happens. And, you know, we go all through our life like that. We leave just as somebody else's drama happens. And I just find that fascinating. We glance each other through life. We never fully know what each other are experiencing. Women as negative space. Woman 1. 2/3 of an armchair, including the legs. Triangle pockets hang at her hips. Neck and shoulders, a bottle of craft ale. The bar splinters for her talking finger, pointed at woman 2. Compromising a love seat. Light bends on her cheeks like an angle grinder. Woman 2. A shadow's frown. The wall grows around her as she shrinks. The stool makes room, but she slips it. Passes tables, crouching with men. Brass taps, spliced with girls. A mirror shocks her. The detail of strangers. The door slices open. Just a whisker.
Who are the poets and writers to have inspired your writing journey?
Wow, that's another huge one, isn't it? I think because I've been like a poetry fanatic all my life, there's just so many. I mean, I can remember key moments. I mean, as a child, when I read Alfred Noyes' The Highwayman, that was just like, wow. And I learned that off by heart, and it became like a mantra for me when I was trying to keep calm as a kid. And, you know, I just love the rhythm and the narrative of that kind of writing. Still look for a lot of narrative in writing, even though I probably don't write it myself. And then much later, I guess, when I was at Lampeter University, I was there briefly to do a postgraduate management course. And Lampeter was a fab place, a real little oasis. And we had visiting bookstores, like a book fair. And it came, and I went down to the Union, and I found Ted Hughes' Crow there, and took it back, and I read it, and that was a moment for me. That really was. I mean, you know, we were talking about the language that I kind of write in my poetry. That gave me the gravitas. That gave me an idea of what can be achieved with pared down language. So it had all the kind of intonation of something from the King James Bible, but it was modern. And yet it wasn't modern, really. You know, it was written well before my time, you know, but you know, it was, that was probably the first modern poetry I read at that point, because I completely immersed myself in the old-fashioned, you know, golden treasury of poetry. So there was definitely that. And then, you know, being a part of the writing community again, you know, I did my master's in like 98. So you kind of meet your heroes, don't you? So Robert Minhinnick, my goodness, you know, he was the first poet I met when I was on the MA. He came and gave us a reading, and I sat next to him. And, you know, I know Robert now, and, you know, but then I was like a little mouse, you know, because wow, I mean, his writing does all that and more for me. And that, who else? I mean, my goodness, and I can't even begin to start listing the writers who have influenced me this last 15 years. You know, they're all the people who I see all the time, you know, but I read their work. And the wonderful thing about like the South Wales writing community is that it's just such a welcoming and helpful, such a lovely community of writers, and you know, that's prose writers and poetry writers. So, you know, people like Rian Edwards, it's been a huge influence on my life, really. And Susie Wilde is my editor. Again, I'd read Susie for years before she became my editor. So many writers. Abira Mir, my goodness, her writing just blows me away. And I can't, if I begin to list them, I'd be here all day. But how lucky, I feel so fortunate that those people are in my life now. And that's kind of the thing that makes me spurs me on to write is that I'm in amongst this creative community of people who kind of, and you know, just living around people who are making, whether that's art or photography, you know, no matter what the medium, just knowing and having those people around you and talking about a creative life makes you a better creative, and it makes you a more committed creative. And if, you know, arguably, if that's what you want to do with your life, you only have to really do it. It's because, you know, practice will get you over the line if you've got the talent and determination. Yeah. So the next poem is called He Tells Me How Trees Communicate. And I wrote this about my eldest son, who's on the autistic spectrum. So when he was very small, his language was quite late to come in. And now he's 19. And I've never really stopped taking, you know, our little chats, you know, as magical little interactions. He tells me how trees communicate. Calls it the wood wide web. Roots threading with fungi, the modem of trees, code for another way of living. In droughts like this, taproots reach for water, look to trees with deep longing, ringing out secret reservoirs. I unravel too, with the sun at its extreme, the air unreachable, the ground a fractured shell. I reach out a hand, and he takes it, now beyond the age of for embarrassment at his mother's shows of affection. The trees speak of it, ash to ash, arteries in their root embrace.
Are you working on anything at present?
Well, I'm always working on something. You know, even especially when I'm really busy with like day work, with my day job, that's when it comes. It's like an intrusive thought, isn't it? You got, you know, the very time you think, oh, I've got to hit this deadline. So I am writing. I never really stop writing, but you do go through a period after you've published that, you know, it goes a bit dry because you're on this kind of, you know, you read it, you're on this cycle of readings, and you feel like you shouldn't be writing those poems anymore. You feel like that chapter should have ended for you, but it doesn't work like that. I'm still writing the odd flood poem. Flood, I feel, still hasn't fully had her say, so they're still coming up. And one of the things I really did want to do after I finished all this, was to go back to writing a children's book that I started writing 10 years ago. That was kind of halfway finished at that point, that I shelved because the poetry took over. And, you know, you just kind of go with the flow, don't you? But I really must go back to that book. And I'm really hoping that next year I will find time to finish it. But I've also got a lovely commission for next year. I've got some poetry that I'm writing for a play for a Company of Sirens, which is lovely. That's going to be performed, I think it's roughly about next May. So that hasn't been written yet. So that's an exciting collaboration. Yeah, that's really great. And I love writing for performance. The poetry takes on a new life. And to see what other people do with it is just really exciting. And it becomes something new, you know. You think, oh, you know, you see it performed, you think, did I write that? You don't quite recognise it in another context. But I definitely think that theatre is an avenue that more poets, you know, could enter into. if there were more opportunities within the theatre world, if there was more funding to take on poets, I think that a whole new realm of writing and performance could evolve. So I'd love to see more of that, but I'm looking forward to that project very much.
Diolch yn fawr, Tracy. I know it's been kind of several attempts for both of us to kind of find our diaries, to correlate in terms of getting to this moment, and I'm very grateful for you in terms of making this time to talk to me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Taz.